Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I am delighted to welcome an Army veteran and accomplished and respected coach from Colorado, USA, Dr. Ryan Crittenden. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you very much. I am glad to be here with you today.
Thank you. Dr. Crittenden is an organizational development coach. He's the founder of Excel Coaching and Development. And as I mentioned, he's an Army veteran. So, Ryan, before we get into leadership development, tell me about your own journey in brief.
Yeah, real quick, you mentioned I did serve some time in the U.S. Army, 2010 to 2014, and there I really saw how important leadership really was.
Mm,
I experienced good and bad leaders,
mm,
and obviously when I got out, I wanted to be a good leader, so I um, got into a leadership development journey and into speaking and coaching. And now, that kind of changed my life. So now I'm out doing the same for others
mm.
over the last 8 years or so.
Oh, wonderful. So, before I ask you the first question on leadership development, you mentioned there are good leaders and bad leaders.
Mm.
How do you define a good leader?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's the ever evolving question, right? So a
Correct.
good leader really is someone that has the ability to lift others up. And then on the flip side, a bad leader is one that dictates down and is always focused on the bad things about someone and really just kind of beats them down.
That's great definitions. So, Ryan, let's now talk about leadership development and then we'll talk about authenticity in work and life, two areas
Mm.
that you know a lot about. What does strengths based coaching mean in your practice, and how does it shape your approach to leadership development?
Yeah, the great thing about being strengths based, going back to what a good leader is,
Hmm.
strengths based coaching and development focuses on what is right with someone. And then once we're able to really identify your strengths and what is right about you, we're able to grow where you have the most potential growth.
And what are some common obstacles leaders face in developing their leadership potential, and how can coaching overcome these? And give me an example if you can.
Yeah, so the first thing that I always see, first obstacle is the level of self-awareness. Most people can't identify what their strengths are.
Hmm.
They may have a lot of book knowledge, which is great. They may have, time in their careers, but that doesn't necessarily mean those are strengths. Those are just things about you.
Yeah.
In a personal experience, I was in a leadership role, and I knew I really related better to people than my boss thought. So he wanted to give me a lot of tasks that get me away from people. And I grew frustrated. And so I kind of kept saying, hey, I need to be away from my desk and I need to be with people.
Hmm.
But I didn't have that level of self awareness where I could actually identify it,
Hmm.
other than I just had these feelings. So coaching really helped me be able to put words to it and then be able to communicate it clearly to other people around me.
Hmm. And a follow-up question to that would be that what are some indicators that a leader could benefit from coaching?
Mm.
How should they begin their journey? I mean, when should a leader uh, figure out that they need a coach?
Yeah, that's a really great question. As right now, as soon as you hear someone talking about having a coach, you need one.
Hmm.
Sooner the better, I always say, because what a coach does is partner with
Hmm.
um, their client. Like a real coach is going to help draw things out of you to where it's kind of a creative, thoughtful process.
Right.
So the sooner that a leader engages with a coach,
Hmm.
the better.
Hmm. And once but you engage with a coach, how long should the coaching be for?
That's another great question. Really depends on what your goals are. I've
Mm,
had some clients that, work with me for 3, 4 months, and some are, going on, even longer, a year or so. And it might be even for a season where it's for a quarter where you're trying to accomplish some goals.
mm,
Summer tends to calm down where people,
mm.
are not working with coaches as much.
Yeah.
Um, and then it kind of picks up. So it might just be your rhythm of life too.
Mm,
Whatever your goals are, whatever you're trying to accomplish will help
mm.
dictate how long you should work with a coach.
Great response. And what role does emotional intelligence play
Mm.
while you're coaching, and why is this so important?
Yeah. So one of the things that I do, I have kind of a niche coaching program based on strengths, and I call it Strengths Foundations. During there, you're going to raise your level of self-awareness, and then you're going to raise almost naturally
Right,
your awareness of other people.
right.
So the more that you can learn about yourself and others, you're actually able to go deeper into coaching and have greater results when you're able to understand who you are and who other people might be.
Well said. My next question for you, Ryan, is how do team workshops in your coaching practice help build stronger and more resilient leaders? And give me an example of some teams that you have worked with and how was the difference you saw
Mm.
before and after.
Yeah, so working with teams, first, like my first entry level working with teams, everybody does the strengths foundations because they're going to understand themselves. And then when we go into the team coaching time, everybody actually already has a working understanding of the strengths
Hmm.
that their team members have. We'll
Hmm.
put it, you put it up on the screen, and everybody says, "Oh, that makes sense. That's why you are so good at, building relationships with other people."
Right.
One of my favorite examples, I was working with a young team of executives,
Hmm.
and in the middle of the team coaching time, we were working on uh, job specific roles.
Hmm.
And the CEO and the COO realized once they put everything on paper, they
Hmm.
were drained
Right.
by their jobs.
Hmm.
And they actually started talking about each other's strengths,
Hmm.
and they switched roles.
Wow.
And they were small enough at
Hmm.
that time to do that.
Hmm.
So they had a new CEO, new COO.
Hmm.
But what they saw after that was is that they actually loved their jobs a lot more, and they cared more about the mission than
Right.
ever before.
Right. Great example. How do you encourage leaders to align their personal values with those of their organization and their roles?
Hmm. Yeah, a lot of times the values of the organization is why they're there,
Mhm.
especially if they're a high performing leader.
Yeah.
Things already have to align. But what's really great to see is when who they are naturally, when they start seeing what draws them to their organization. Um, and then that kind of renews this passion, not just professionally, but even personally.
Mm.
Um, and so it's pretty neat to see.
Mhm. Brian, you've been an Army veteran, and you were just telling me a few minutes back that you decided to become a coach after you left the Army. Leadership in the Army can be very, very hierarchical.
Hmm.
What have you learned from the Army in terms of leadership that you have brought to your coaching?
Yeah. So here's a story really like to share.
Mm.
I was a few months out of basic training, and I ended up in Afghanistan. And after our mission, every day, everybody would go to the gym. Well, I never had that experience. I go to the gym. I am outside of my element.
Mhm.
I have no idea what I'm doing.
Mm.
So I went to my team leader and I said, "Hey, I don't know what I'm doing. Can I work out with you?"
Mm.
And he said, "No, I work out by myself. That's what
Mhm.
I." So I was pretty discouraged and I left. And my squad leader, who's above my team leader, saw me and he goes, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I was like, I'm going back to the tents because I don't know what I'm doing in the
Mm,
gym.
mm,
And he said, "Well, come work out with me,
mm,
and I'll teach you what I need,
mm.
or I'll teach you what I do." And I ended up working out with him every day for the rest of the deployment
Wow.
for almost an entire year. And I think that's a great example of like leaders, one, look for opportunities to
Mm,
invest in people.
mm.
And um, they also bring people along. You know that there's a saying that leadership's lonely.
Yeah,
Well, it's lonely if you don't bring anyone with you. Like you got
correct.
to bring people up with you.
Hmm. Very interesting. And what a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing this.
Hmm.
One more question relating to leadership, and then I'll move to the next section of our conversation. What are some practical techniques you teach leaders to enhance their social intelligence?
Mm. Yeah. So kind of having their own coach approach.
Mhm,
Be curious about the other people.
mhm,
Ask open-ended questions,
mhm,
and don't one of the, like don't lead with your or don't ask leading questions.
mhm.
Just help your employee, your follower, however you want to put it, explore their own opportunities
Yeah.
and their own decisions,
Mm,
and let them come up with a plan.
mm.
And it can actually really help your leadership ability. And then
Fascinating.
when you get curious,
Mm,
a lot of fun things can happen.
absolutely. Well said. So, Ryan, let's now talk about authenticity and work and life. And again, that's an area that you have a lot of understanding and knowledge about. My first question is, how do you define authenticity? And what does it
Mm.
mean to be authentic in both our personal and professional lives?
Yeah. Wow. I think there's volumes of books and research on this. This is
Correct.
a really important question. But looking at being authentic, it really comes from really understanding who you are and then having peace about it.
Right.
And then you're able to, when you show up in the workplace and you really understand who you are, you can have these relationships with other people that, there's fair expectations of each other in the
Right.
workplace. And then you come into your professional or your private life, your personal life, um, and there's no one to impress. There's just you being you, and you're growing. And if you're married, you have that same, like your spouse is the same. They are just who they are, and they're growing as a person. And there's those healthy expectations that, hey, we're just going to grow,
Yeah.
and we're comfortable with who we are.
Well said. And how do you help clients differentiate between performing and being
Mm.
true to oneself?
Yeah, that's another really deep question because when you show up to work, you always want to put your, your best foot forward and all that. Um, but when it comes to the point where you kind of hate Sunday night.
Mhm.
I don't know how other, cultures are, but at least, in America, we start the work day or work week usually Monday morning.
Yeah.
And so if you hate Sunday nights because you're going to go to bed, wake up and have to go to work,
Mm,
you're not being yourself.
correct.
And sometimes in that spot, there's some maybe coaching you can do, and other things like that. But maybe you just need to really dig in and be like, this is not who I am, and you might need to remove yourself from that situation.
Hmm. Very interesting. My next question is, how can authenticity impact a leader's relationships with their teams and peers?
Hmm. Yeah, when the leader is truly being themselves,
Hmm.
really great things can happen.
Correct.
Um, for just a really simple example,
Hmm.
we had a team. They were in the middle of a merger and from another larger organization, and things were rough. The new company that bought their company really hit results and increase the bottom line by X every month and all this. And everybody's really stressed because of the culture change. So we were working with the regional manager, and it was simple enough to, which is that when you go meet with your team, whether it be in person or online, look them in the eye and say, I am glad to be with you.
Right.
And it started to change the culture and really ease the tensions. So when they showed up, everybody started saying, I'm glad to be with you. And they actually were just glad to be with each other.
Correct. Correct. Well,
Yeah.
well said. You also, and when I was reading about you and preparing for my conversation, I was fascinated to see that there's also a reference to self-awareness. So my
Hmm.
question to you is, what role does self-awareness play to achieve authenticity, and how do you help your clients?
Yeah. So self-awareness, nothing can happen without a willingness to grow your self-awareness. That's really the first step for anything. So first we do that through the strengths foundations.
Hmm.
We figure that out through some assessments, but we dig into it. We really find out what's applicable
Hmm.
and personable for you. That's my journey. Like when I first got coached into strengths, I was able to identify those what my actual strengths were, and then how I can grow my strengths.
Right.
Um, but if you can't really put to terms what your strengths are, um, that's the first thing, and that's that first level of self-awareness. But then it can, it always grows. Like even just recently,
Mhm.
um, I came across an analogy of work of like flying a plane where there's people flying the plane and then all these, people starting to land the plane, and then there's someone that lands it and
Hmm.
drives it.
Hmm.
Well, I like flying the plane. I
Hmm.
like being this high level guy.
Yeah.
And I always got burnt out of my other jobs because I was always landing the plane. That's not what I'm good at.
Yeah.
And I did it because I had to. And that
Correct.
actually really raised my self-awareness, being like, that's why I always got frustrated.
Well said. And it's so important, and you've given a very interesting story about self-awareness, about flying the plane. Thank you.
Hmm.
I have time for three more questions for you. Ryan, what are the signs that a leader is living and working authentically? And why is it essential for their own well-being?
Yeah. I think the first sign is when you can say, I'm glad to be here with you, and you really mean it.
Hmm.
Um, because we spend so much of our life at work,
Hmm.
that if we just hate being there and we're not glad to be there, that really just depletes us.
Yeah.
And so the first thing is, maybe there's some coaching, maybe there's some work that needs to happen. But raising that level of self-awareness does help. And and when you don't like being there, your
Mhm.
teams aren't going to do well.
Right.
And the people you lead can only go as far as you are.
Correct. Correct. Well said. And how do you help leaders maintain their authentic selves while adapting to their own organizational culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things I always encourage is just ongoing coaching, meeting pretty regularly with my clients.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they come to the table and bring what their concerns are. And as we look at their true self with our, organizational culture, um, we always say, is this always this reminder is this lining up with who you are?
Right.
And there's been times where we're like, I don't think so.
Mm.
And we just kind of walk through there, like, what do you want to accomplish in your life? What
Mm.
are your goals? Does your organization still meet that? Are you still meeting that for your organization?
Mm. And my last question to you, what advice would you give to leaders struggling with the fear of being vulnerable in their own roles?
Mm. Yeah, that's tough. Um, I would encourage them to have this culture of trust. The sooner that um, the sooner that the leader becomes vulnerable, the sooner everybody else does. And now that's not one of those things like you're best friends or you become family with the people you're leading,
Yeah.
but it's okay to say when you're struggling.
Mhm.
And it's okay to say, hey, I need some help. You
Right.
know, can, where can we, divvy up a little bit more tasks, whatever is appropriate
Yeah.
for those situations. But I would say have a culture of trust.
Mm.
And the sooner that the leader becomes vulnerable, the sooner everybody else does.
Amazing. And on that note, and your last statement of how important it is to build a culture
Mm,
of trust. Thank you, Ryan, for speaking to me about your own journey. I think we covered a lot of very, very interesting ground, including your definitions of good leader versus a bad
mm,
leader. We spoke about strengths based coaching. We spoke about some of the common obstacles leaders face. You also were very clear in how a leader could benefit from coaching. And you're obviously a well respected and known coach. We covered a little bit of ground on emotional intelligence. I loved your example of the gym, which really
mm.
demonstrated inclusive leadership, uh,
Yeah.
which may not necessarily be that common in the defense services, but clearly your leader was fantastic. Then we
Hmm.
talked a little bit about authenticity, about being true to oneself, and also about self awareness. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.